Welcome to Healing Echoes, Rebuilding Life After Trauma and Abuse. Today we have an exciting guest, Sandra Bean, who is known as the Connection Queen. She is an acclaimed educator, speaker, community leader, and coach. Founder of the 5.6 thousand member St. Pete Girl Bosses group, she's a beacon for gifted people and women in business. A two-time finalist for Best of the Bay Best Networker and advocate for mental health and neurodiversity. Sandy's been featured in numerous podcasts for her work with entrepreneurs and neurodivergent people of all ages. Residing in St. Pete, she passionately believes in the inherent goodness of the world and the unique potential within everyone. Hey, Sandy.
Hey, Caitlin, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm great. Living the dream.
So I know we talked a little bit before about ADHD and advocacy. So that's definitely what I wanted to talk about today. I know you've been an educator and worked with people with it. So I'll let you have the floor.
Yes, it's so great. Okay, so I actually have ADHD myself, but wasn't diagnosed until I was 42, which was several years ago. And it's interesting because the more that I learn about later diagnoses, the more I realize that actually is a pattern that you see in parents a lot, is that they receive a diagnosis when one of their children receives one. Because I think like a lot of us, we have these preconceived notions about what autism and ADHD look like. Even as an educator, you think about the hyperactivity component. There's pieces that don't necessarily seem to fit, especially because I'm what we would consider twice exceptional. And you and I have talked about this. And in an educational context, that means you're gifted and you have a disability or a neurodivergence of some kind, right? So we tend to, it covers it up, right? So your giftedness will mask your disability, but your disability also can mask your giftedness. So you're not ever really getting what you need.
Right.
Which is really great for your self-esteem, let me say. It's fabulous. But I think it's led me, there were so many events that I had to go back and like alchemize, I guess, and develop some forgiveness around, because I didn't know, the people around me didn't know that I had this issue. And so now, though, it's made me an amazing coach, and I'm a good mom, and even better now because of it. And it's funny because I was always really great with the band of merry misfit children, the ones who had trouble in other places, in other contexts. And I'm really good at setting cultures. And so I would get specific kids would get placed with me, and we always made great progress. And now I realize it's because I'm one of them.
So, you know firsthand how to work with them.
Exactly. And so when I started the networking group, I started really looking at that connection between ADHD and entrepreneurship. And I think I gave you this figure, but it's something like 4 to 5% of the population has ADHD, a diagnosis, but in entrepreneurship, it's 29% or greater. So there's a massive representation in entrepreneurs with people with ADHD, like Richard Branson, Justin Timberlake is neurodivergent, Adam Levine, neurodivergent. So a lot of people who are like big names, these neurodivergents. I think Selma Hayek is dyslexic, like it's wild.
Yeah, I think they're a lot more common than people realize, for sure.
Absolutely. And how many times have you met somebody and been like, oh yeah, I see it. That's autistic, or I can see your ADHD from here. And and people get so offended by that. They really hate labels. They're like, I don't define myself by that. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I don't either. But I think that there's a degree of camaraderie that comes with like being able to find other people that maybe have had similar experiences, right? Or process things the same way you do. And so it's not like we define ourselves that way, but it's more of a, you just are like for my daughter is a great example. She got her autism diagnosis when she was 15 or 16. And we always knew she was quirky, but it was such a relief to her when she found out she was autistic. The way that she described it was like she could exhale, because she realized that like there wasn't anything wrong with her. Her brain just worked really differently. And so all of those attempts to be understood and all of that, like she forgave that, because she was like, oh, okay, I'm autistic. Like it's just, and we found out that's the experience for a lot of people. And for
that explanation makes you feel so much better. I relate to that.
Yeah, exactly. So now I get to help folks with ADHD kind of work through their process. It's so interesting too, because a lot of my clients or people that DM me, they tend to be in their 50s, 60s, and they just had they're just finding out about this. And it's like, it would have made such a difference.
Yeah.
So
I think that generation for sure, because there wasn't as much of the testing for it. They're like, no, we're not. I'm like, yeah, you are. Or that's why most of us have it, because it's hereditary.
Exactly. It's so funny too. And even with like, you just, like I said, like there's these hallmarks that you don't think are part of that disability. And now we know,
Yeah.
Like in autism is interesting. The research is just so much more clear there, because there were no girls even in the initial groups when they were doing research. It was only boys. So it's like, what does that even look like? And
that's why my parents never got me tested for it. Just because I'm a girl. I'm like, hello.
Right? It's like, oh, good morning. It's wild, right? And people have so much self-hatred. That's been a really hard thing to witness when people want to be heard, is there's not a link in giftedness and having anxiety disorders or anything like that, unless you are verbally gifted. Then there's a greater incidence of anxiety and depression.
Right.
Interestingly, and it's not linked to people who are gifted in math, or super logical thinkers. Anyway, but there is a link between ADHD, autism, and anxiety disorders and depression. But I believe, my theory is that anyone who is neurodivergent, I think that we have a greater incidence of anxiety and depression because of the experience. So I know you specialize in trauma, and I read something about how we don't know what a neurodivergent person without trauma looks like, because just growing up that way, gifted, ADHD, dyslexic, autistic, any of those things, it's uncomfortable because the world's not designed for you. So you automatically begin to assume you're the problem, and we become people pleasers, and all of that has to be peeled away if we want to be happy later. Like there's huge subpopulation of us that is addicted to alcohol use disorder, people using all of these coping strategies, right? And I feel like once you're like, oh, that's all it is, it's just ADHD, it's like you can breathe.
I'm not crazy, I'm not broken, I'm neurodivergent. That's definitely my experience. My partner's as well. Most of his traumatic memories are from behavior that was related to his ADHD, but they were just like, you're a bad kid, you don't listen. I'm like, no, he has ADHD.
Exactly. You made him sit still for 6 hours and he couldn't focus. Like,
it's got mad at him because he didn't put his chair away or things like that. I would always get in trouble because of my regulation with like feeling and hearing, and stop it, you're being weird. I'm like, no, I'm autistic. Looking back, because I didn't get my diagnosis until I was in my 20s. So looking back at my entire childhood, I was like, oh, that says a lot.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Like part of the reason I pulled my daughter out of public school and homeschool her now is because she's autistic, and she's also profoundly gifted, but she doesn't want to wear shoes. It's only Crocs, right? This is where it started. It's so funny. She would only wear rain, and they had to be hunter rain boots, of course, because why not? For years. And there wasn't a really big deal, but when she started 3rd grade PE, all of a sudden it was a big deal, and she needed tie shoes, and she had to sit out, and they would put her like on the punishment bench and make her fill out the form about what she did wrong. She didn't do anything wrong, but it was an occupational therapy goal, because the feeling, because her sensory needs are pretty intense, which happens with autism and giftedness. So it's like double. And she just was like, forget it. And that started her on this path of, there's something wrong with me. I'm a bad kid. I can't follow directions. And I was watching her go down this spiral, witnessing it in real time. And I realized that maybe a generation ago, I would have been like, well, we're going to suck it up and put our shoes on. And she would have just learned to swallow her feelings. But I didn't want to do that. Right. But that happened to you, I'm certain. And I know it happened to me, where, and then all of a sudden we end up hating exercise or whatever, I didn't and I didn't want to write for a long time because I lost my spelling packet in 5th grade because I have ADHD and I got a C in spelling. And like,
you're like, oh,
I spell it wrong. It was like a thing. Now, in front of people is really uncomfortable, but it's that the traumatic piece of it is real. Like people don't always understand that it's a component of having a neurodiversity,
It really is. We decided as parents we wanted to do it a better way than just pushing them through it. I know related to me, I have really bad anxiety as well, and I was always pushed to do public speaking. I am good at it now. I still get really bad nerves, but I was pushed through entire meltdowns. No, you have to do it. And there was no like, feel your feelings. So I'm glad that his parents now were like, no, like they have a right. I've put my youngest school age child in public school for the first time this year. And already I'm like, no, because just like that, they're punishing her for things that shouldn't be punished. They should be accommodated. Like, yes, she still has to do her work, but she has autism. Like,
can she wear headphones?
Misbehaving to misbehave. It's a processing issue. Yeah, our oldest is the same way. And I chuckled when you said the thing about Crocs, because all of my 3 oldest all wear Crocs, and they're all neurodivergent in one way or another. They hate
They're really comfortable.
shoes.
Thank you, Crocs.
Making my children happy.
I mean, exactly. We like, and clothing is a whole nother thing. We can't just go to Target. Oh no. It's like Posh Peanut, Free People, like anything that's really soft and like Anthropology. I'm the same way though. And it's just, we have to be so specific about those things. And it frustrates me when people say, well, you can't, they're going to have to do it sooner or later. Like, will they really though? If I allow them to have the path that's really right for them.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like, will your children ever necessarily have to wear shoes that are uncomfortable? No, they won't. Will they?
Because you've taught them to search it out. Yeah,
exactly. Even with homework, like someone asked on my TikTok, my 504 or IEP TikTok, is it possible to put in my child's plan that they only have to do 50% of their assignments? So I love that question, because the point of school is that you learn a thing, and that the point of activities is learning and processing, and the point of assessments is demonstrating your knowledge. So as an educator, if a child can demonstrate that they're understanding it in one problem or one conversation, I don't care if they do the whole worksheet. It doesn't matter to me. It's less grade, quite frankly. But there are people that are so lockstep and by the book that they feel like, well, if I give this kid that right or privilege, then I'm going to have to give it to that kid too. First of all, I say, okay, then give it to that kid. And secondly, it's that triage model, right? Where I used to do this with my students. We would line up I would give them an index card that had their injury on it. We would play emergency room on the first day, whatever there. And some things were so silly, like I have a pencil stuck in my ear, like dumb stuff. But I would have them line up by severity of injury. And then I would ask them, well, who is in here first today? And I would purposely give the couple kids that came first, like really not severe things. And I would say, well, you were here first. Shouldn't I pay attention to you first? And they'd say, well, no, like his arms fell off. Like you have to. So we would then have this conversation about, if there's something that you need and I'm meeting that need, it's okay, because he doesn't need the same thing. And so we would have those conversations about what that looks like and what that looks like in the world, and how you can learn to advocate for yourself. And I think it's a worthy conversation to have with everybody. Like, it's okay if we all need different things, and I'm not getting more than you are because somebody needs to give more attention, or more resources. So I just think that there's this inherent competition in the world that creates these situations that make it hard for neurodivergent people to feel like we deserve.
Yeah, I legit had that conversation with my 7-year-old's writing and reading teacher. She didn't have a problem with it because I explained she's autistic. And this is her first year in public school. She's always been homeschooled or have a private teacher. And she was completely understanding. She's like, okay, I'll make sure that she adjusts better because she is different than all my other students. Her math teacher was like, okay, I'm going to treat her like I do everyone else. I'm like, but you shouldn't, because not everybody's the same. Just like if another kid besides my daughter had more issues than my daughter, I would expect you to treat her as such. Yeah, it's a nightmare. And so like you said, the correlation between trauma and neurodivergence, I feel like it's still happening, maybe on a lesser scale, but especially in settings like public school. It's so frustrating.
It's super frustrating. And I think, people are tossing around, well, ADHD is only just it's a manifestation of trauma. Okay, maybe it exacerbates it because it impacts your executive function, but I don't believe that that's where it comes from. I think there are just different types of function,
Right.
I read an article it talked about how ADHD brains are potentially the kinds of brains, if we were still in like a hunter-gatherer society, we were the ones that they put like on the outskirts because we're like hyper vigilant and have lots of energy and notice things. And we were not the people on the inside sitting and weaving quietly. That's not how we operate. But there's meant to be different ways that people process information, because roles are supposed to be distinct, right?
Yeah.
It just doesn't work that way because, you know, for years since industrialization, there has been this industrial model of schooling where we're trying to turn out the good workers. Whereas now I think the focus is on a lot more innovation. And so I think we're on the precipice of being able to, with skilled educators, which is a whole other can of worms because we don't pay our teachers enough and it's frustrating. So the whole thing.
Yeah.
But with skilled educators, I think we are in a position where even for your daughter, I bet she's a beautiful divergent thinker. She's probably super creative, probably more empathetic than her classmates. So we can create experiences where she can actually lean into those strengths and become an innovator in those ways.
Yeah.
So because of technology, I think we have this ability to personalize education with the hands of a skilled educator that would allow us to accommodate. But I think we're still kind of stuck in that industrial model and it's not working.
Yeah. Trying to get out of that is the challenge right now. For sure.
Of course, the paradigms are built around it. So
yeah, it's like,
yeah,
stop looking at it as, I mean, it is a disability, but stop looking at it as just a disability or a weakness and start looking at, okay, individually, what are their strengths and then helping them build those.
100%. If you have people with ADHD on your team, like corporate teams, the reason why folks with ADHD make amazing leaders, if they have executive function support, or amazing, because they're really creative, can look at creative solutions, and risks are like, whatever, we'll take risks. We are impulsive. We make decisions. So it's like, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to build this rocket. And people with dyslexia, they're really interesting because people with dyslexia can take a problem and almost, I'm trying to explain it, but it's like they can almost visualize all the ins and outs and bits and pieces of it in a way that neurotypicals can't. So in terms of creating strategy and all that kind of stuff, super strong. Can any of us keep files appropriately? Not unless you teach us and give us a lot of support.
Show us how.
Exactly. That's why God made assistants. So
yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting for adults to go into that strengths first approach because we've been taught that, yeah, I'm super creative, but my office is a mess. It's like we really focus on what's wrong with us, you know?
Yeah.
And it is a disability. It's exhausting, but at the same time, like we're not like basket cases most of the time. Most of the time.
Well, especially if you have that support, it definitely makes a difference. I know my household being very neurodivergent, we kind of lean on each other and balance each other out. My partner is ADHD, I'm autistic, so he's all the things I'm not and I'm all the things he's not, so we kind of bounce off each other. And it's the support system, I think, and focusing on what your strengths are. That's what I've been preaching to him for the last like 3 months. Whenever he starts to go like, I can't do this, I can't do that, I'm like, yeah, but look at all the things you can do. And we do the same thing with our kids, because especially our oldest, she's autistic and she's in public school as well. So there's our times where she's like, why can't I do this? Or why can't I do that? I'm like, okay, baby, but look at all the things you can do and that you're really good at that.
I love the, so Maddie, my daughter, she has ADHD, right? So ADHD, autism. And it's like, she gets so frustrated. She's like, my autism really wants order and structure, but my ADHD can't create it. So I just freeze. So I love my autistic people that like to create routines. Are like, you could do it this way, and here's a routine you could go around. And this, I love that because I'm like, I could do it that way. That's brilliant. Write that down. Oh, yeah. Like if you give me a plan, I'm cool with it. But if I think about it every time, because my working memory just goes, no.
Yeah,
like it's like a puzzle. You can figure out like who's going to work here, and I mean, I wouldn't want to be neurotypical.
I couldn't imagine it.
I don't even know. Like, is that a thing? I sometimes doubt it's like a unicorn. Like, really? Are there true neurotypicals?
Are there really?
I'm not convinced.
I think though that's where the sense of, even if it's not another neurodivergent person, the sense of community really matters. Because like you said, it's like all the puzzle pieces coming together.
Yeah.
And it's really, really important.
It's true. And I think going back to the idea of mental health, one of the things that I've noticed with my clients as a coach is it's really hard to access mental health resources through people that also understand neurodivergence. I was doing some research for one of the modules in my course. It's about eating and nutrition and stuff. And I've struggled with, eating disorders throughout my life. And what I realized is that For example, people with ADHD have a much greater incidence of binge eating disorders, and people with autism have a much greater incidence of ARFID and anorexia. And so disordered eating is super common in the neurodivergent community for a variety of reasons. There's lots of reasons why. But eating disorder therapy is often not neurodiversity informed. And so the results become difficult they can't sustain results a lot of times. So for example, like with autistic folk, one of the weaknesses with some autistic people can be generalization from situation to situation. So for example, if in treatment you learn how to handle meal times at this time and this table in this situation, that's fine. But when you go home, it's harder for the autistic brain to generalize that into this time in this situation. Now it's busy.
Right.
Hey, sorry.
You're good.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And so the more we can be open about neurodivergence, I think the more that providers will be aware that that's something, that there is a difference in how the brain learns.
Yeah.
Which mental health therapies, CBT, DBT, all of that, like we have to remember that neurodivergent people need different modalities. They learn differently. And so the traditional treatment models may not be as effective for neurodivergent folks.
Yeah, you're literally treating someone who thinks and functions differently. You have to adapt it to them.
And they're mentally ill. So
you're like, oh,
yeah, right. So now we have to think about that because, I think there's an overlap, right? I mean, people with ADHD have a greater chance of dealing with depression and anxiety, and autistic people, I think there's an overlap with OCD. So there's definitely things people have to consider, and I don't know that the conversation is as open and available as it should be.
Yeah, that's part of why I had you on.
Exactly. It needs to be part of that.
It definitely does, especially knowing that it's one of your specialties, because you have multiple. I was like, yes, come talk, please.
Exactly.
So in closing, is there any advice or anything else you want to share?
I would say if you are a neurodivergent person and you are seeking mental health assistance, make sure that you are seeking people who are versed in neurodiversity, or if you have ADHD, autism, something like that, and you find that whatever you're trying to do to mitigate your symptoms of the impact of your neurodiversity and it's not sticking, consider there might be something else going on. I do feel like differential diagnosis is really important. For a lot of people, it's too expensive. So there are community resources for testing that you can lean into. But I would also say that self-diagnosis is valid. And you don't need to necessarily seek out a professional diagnosis to try some of the behavioral strategies that might help. And I would say also be aware that you may have some trauma and mental health impacts, even if you're not labeled with those, just simply because you have a neurodivergence. So it becomes more and more important for people with neurodivergent brains to seek out mental health support and all of that. We just have to be hyper vigilant about it, and gifted brains too. So I would say, don't be afraid to find help if you're struggling, because it's likely that you are if you find yourself you are neurodivergent. And psychoeducation is really helpful. So just learning about how your brain works, learning about how it doesn't work can help you self-advocate and really cut down on the amount of BS you have to deal with on a daily basis. Definitely gives you that better understanding. And then do you wish to plug any of your socials or any way that anybody can reach you? Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at think_bean. You can find me on TikTok on thinkbean. And my website is just sandybean.com. I have a course called the Grown-Up ADHD Playbook course that also involves coaching. And I do one-on-one calls and one-on-one packages as well for people who want to really accelerate whatever they're trying to do with some neurodivergent support. So reach out if you have questions about kids, about adults, about any of that stuff. You just want to vibe with me. I would love to hear from you. I'm just hello@sandybean.com. Awesome. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. It is my pleasure, Caitlin. Thanks for having me.